Okay, thank you for coming. Welcome. And thank you, Nan Young, Charles, and Len, and everybody who's participated and helped organize this. I just have a couple practical things. One, there are 2 restrooms down the hall. Secondly, there are items on the table, publications that Charles was involved in. Can everybody hear me, by the way? Yeah? Publications that Charles was involved in at the far end, as well as a poster with the different, with the signatures of different people who participated in the conference on Neo-Latin culture and literature that was held here in his honor about 10 years ago. And on the closer table, there's an encyclopedia, Neo-Latin, that Charles edited, co-edited. And then a little bit closer to us, there are things that you are very welcome and in fact encouraged to take home with you, including an essay by Charles on the 2 cultures, science and humanities. There are many extra copies. It was produced at ECU. Please take a copy. And there are also flyers and other things there that you can look at and take home as souvenirs. Last comment is we have a lot of food catered by Nino's. And food and drink in this room, so please, you're all strongly encouraged to linger afterwards, after the ceremony, partake in some wine or a soft drink and some food, and talk to each other. Okay, so thank you.
Robbie, should I speak into the mic? All right. Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I would like to first just express some thanks to people who have helped us in this organization, Nan Young, Thomas and I, and Annalyn Miller. First of all, to Robbie, the inimitable Robbie Quinn, who has done all of the audio-visual and enabled us to also live stream this and record it for many friends who are not able to be with us today. There's someone coming in the door. If someone could help, thank you. In addition to Robbie, I would like to thank Kevin Mall, who selected the introit and the closing piece from Pierre Dalarue, a composer who he much admired. And there are 2 pieces that Charles sang at a memorial service for Melanie and Kevin's son a number of years ago. So it has a certain resonance with Charles's own passing. Would also like to thank Salvatore and Massimo, 2 South Italian paesani of Charles's from the town who have provided the catering from Nino's restaurant, and to all of you who are here to participate, especially those who have come from afar. Paul Grenler, a good friend of Charles who we'll hear from in a moment, and especially to Patricia and Dennis White. Patricia is the grandniece of Charles, and they have come all the way from New York to be with us. So many thanks to them. There are also regrets from a fair number of colleagues who are not able to be here. Perhaps they're streaming live and or seeing the recording a bit later, but with regrets, Melanie Mall, Ann Bunnell, Luke Deitz, Tim Kirscher, Conrad Eisenbichler, and Enrique Gonzalez could not make it, some of them who are participants in the Festschrift for Charles Fantazzi. Okay, so if you look at your program, for those of you who have grown up in the church, you know that there are ceremonies and they're scripted with a liturgy, and they give a certain form for moments like this when we are thinking about and remembering someone and doing their passing. We don't have the benefit of that for this occasion, so what we've chosen to do is choose several facets of Charles's life that we think are representative and worth some of those who may not have known him well or known one facet, and maybe give an overview. And it falls to me to speak about the young man Fantazzi, from Yonkers to New York. Yonkers is his hometown. I take my title from a book by a psychologist by the name of Erik Erikson, who did a famous book on the young man Luther. He managed to over-psychologize Luther's relationship to his father and how that transmitted into a certain vision of God. But I should introduce myself. I'm sorry. The reason I get to tell this part is my name's Jonathan Reed. I forgot this part. We need a script, obviously. I've known Charles since 2002 when I came to East Carolina University, and we've been friends and colleagues. And over the years, often in the company of friends and family, many of them gathered here today or seeing us online, we broke bread together countless times, including on his birthday, which happened to fall on the same day as our eldest son, who was 70 years younger. And so we had these many occasions to be together. And at such dinners, Charles loved to tell stories about his mentors, friends, even foes, and as well as his family, particularly of his early years. And they seemed important to him, so I thought it would be nice to lead in with some of his early stories about his youth. Okay, as Nan Young's wonderful slideshow recounts, both his parents were Italian immigrants. His father, Dominic, was from Abruzzi, his mother, Barbara, from Sicily, and they met, I believe, in New York, certainly in the US. And I'm counting on Patricia to correct me if I get these things wrong. They met in Florence? Okay, so, but in New York. Okay, good. This is a discourse because when we're telling these stories, I'm a historian. I know how flawed memory is. And so if I'm getting this wrong, I need some back and forth from you out there. I am not occupying the role of certainly of a pastor in this space. Okay, so Charles recounted, this was one of the more tragic things that he shared, that his father was killed or murdered when he was very young for crossing a picket line. That's wrong?
That's true.
That's true. Okay.
He was a trolley car conductor and he used to sing Italian songs to his passengers. And he was fabulous,
So he was a conductor of public conveyance, and there must have been some strike, but he was struck down and killed when Charles was very young. I never caught the exact age that Charles was. About 6 or so, yeah. So Charles grew up without his father with him, and he often related that he had a very loving mother, hardworking mother, but they were financially challenged after the death of Dominic especially, and she worked in a carpet factory where she earned her living by doing piecework. And Charles recounts that she used to walk to work, even in cold weather, just to save on bus fare. She had a second relationship with another gentleman, he told me, who was abusive to her and also took her money. So that was another traumatic element in his youthful life. Charles had two older sisters, Dolly and Mary, who were quite a bit older. Dolly was a brilliant, like Charles, she was gifted with languages. And I remember Charles telling me that she was smarter than he was, and he was a considerably talented man, as we all know. But she also had a troubled life and psyche. She fell into some bad crowds. She interestingly got involved in the Chinese community in New York, but had troubles, and eventually she was put in a sanatorium. And Patricia has some wonderful stories about visiting her that you might hear later when we're gathered. So his second sister, Mary, also pictured up there, married a proud Irishman by the name of Joe Hackett. Mary and Joe were like second parents to Charles, and their children, Rosemary and Joey, were like siblings. Rosemary's daughter, Patricia, married Dennis White, and they're here with us. So Charles loved to tell stories about Joe. A lot of his stories were about Joe, who was the surrogate father figure. Joe was a self-described slasher. I can't do it in Charles's inimitable New York accent, but he would get this deep-throated slasher. And he was a house painter, is how he made his living. He was also an expert horseshoe player, and on weekends when he and his buddies were playing horseshoes, he would send Charles to the local tavern to go to the back and get a pail of beer or suds or a keg or something like that. So Charles was his runner, and one of Charles's favorite remembrances that Joe and a buddy to teach Charles how to swim, took him out on a boat in the Hudson River and threw him in. You know, it was literally sink or swim. And that's how although Charles was always thankful for the nurture he received, his early life must have been harder than he let on. In his stories, he told me once that a governmental program identified him as malnourished and sent him to a summer camp where, well-fed, he and other boys were led on runs through the woods by a Native American, I believe from the Huron tribe. Perhaps that sparked his athleticism. In any case, Nanyung wanted me to remind you all that in high school he was a swimmer, a pitcher, a runner. He was called the Flying Italian. No, it was the Flying Wop, pejorative term, because he ran so quickly. He also has stories about running down in New York City, more than I can go into here. In any case, Nanyung relates that Charles was amused to recollect that sobriquet while he was in bed during his last days in Detroit. He did not remember how he fell and broke his hip, the injury that ultimately led to him passing in January. But he said he dreamt that he had run into a wagon. I don't know what that means, but it was running was in a dream he had. Okay. Perhaps most formative for Charles's future career was his years during his years in Yonkers was singing as a cantor in the Catholic Church, at Mass, and in other services. He credited that experience for his first knowledge and love of both Latin and music. I'm not going to go into his career from Yonkers, except to say he did very well. He must have been a scholarship student. He went to the Catholic University of America. He got a BA and an MA there, and then went on to Harvard University, where he did a PhD in comparative literatures, which he said was a cakewalk compared to the hard learning he had to do under George Seifert at the Catholic University. And he has lots of stories about Seifert and nuns and all sorts of experiences he had. Eventually he ends up at Windsor, but I'm going to let others, and you also have full sort of scholarly biographies here, 3 of them sitting on the table, one by a colleague, Luke Deitz, another by the University of Windsor Library on a website, and a remembrance by one of his students from East Carolina University who went on to Duke and do a PhD in classics. And there's lots more details. I recommend those to you. I'll just conclude by saying what is remarkable for me is that though Charles never framed it this way, remark how he excelled as a jovial, humane, and caring person and erudite scholar, despite the challenges he faced during his early years. I know others with similar backgrounds, especially those who have lost a parent early in life, who have turned out far otherwise. So that's the early Charles. Now we turn to music. The singer and lover of music. And Thomas, tell them why you've chosen this particular piece.
Because it is a Baroque piece. I chose that piece. Charles loved Baroque Italian music, and one terrific memory I have of him, as some of you would as well, was at his conference in his honor. Not only did he give a plenary speech next to James Hankins, who had spoken the day before, But at the dinner, he stood up and he sung an Italian Baroque song, Lament, and it was just electrifying to hear it. And so I also wanted to put a little bit of Italian into the program as well. But Jonathan has a few more remarks about music, and we'll also introduce another performer for it.
Right, so for this section, I'm perhaps the least qualified person. I can carry a tune enough to abuse whatever it is I'm singing, but I have the words of someone else to help me here. Luke Deitz, who I mentioned in praise of Charles Fantazzi, had this reminiscence that I think is a nice introduction. He's talking about Charles's youthful days, the ones we've just left, and quote, Luke writes, "These were the pre-Vatican II days when the Sunday blessing by Papa Pacelli would still be broadcast on the wireless radio. And when the Gregorian chant was still very much present in the Catholic Church. Like so many people before and after, Charles was captured by the transcendent beauty of the chant, so much so that he later studied it with Russell Woolen at the Catholic University. Charles's passion for this magnificent form of early music would later lead him to perform as a soloist chanter under such a distinguished conductor as Théodore Marier, the founder of the Boston Archdiocesan Choir School." And Luke breaks in at this moment with a personal remembrance. "Allow me to say," this is Luke, "at this juncture that when Charles and I first met many years ago at a reception, we started to discuss plain chant, and one of us, I cannot remember which, who started humming a lesser-known antiphon. The other joined in, and to our immense mutual surprise and deep delight, we finished singing it together. That was the beginning of our friendship." In the course of his long career as a singer, Charles made his warm and engaging voice available to other musical genres as well. For several years, he was a tenor soloist at the University of Windsor School of Music, and he performed with the Detroit Symphony, the Plymouth Symphony, the Wayne State Symphony, and many other orchestras of international renown. End quote. Thomas, we all share some fond memories of Charles's extemporaneous singing a cappella at events like the symposium and other dinners. I do remember Charles saying that one of his voice coaches told him he could have been a contender. He could have been a professional tenor, but he took another route because he was already engaged deep in his academic career at that point. He was also a great supporter of the arts and music here in Greenville. He especially loved the Four Seasons Chamber Music Festival, and we are very honored and fortunate to have here with us Hye-Jin Kim, here to play a piece she's chosen for the occasion.
Hello, my name is Hye-Jin Kim, and I first met Charles back in 2011 when I came here as a very young faculty. And I first met him after my first concert at the Fletcher Music Center, and I could immediately, and he came, Nanyang, and he came to the backstage and talked to me, and with twinkles in his eyes, I remember that childlike excitement that he shared with me after the performance, and immediately we connected over the love of music, love of beauty in everything that he can find. He also loves, I think, unfortunately, he didn't share with me that he was a wonderful singer himself. So I missed out on the chance of hearing him singing, but he did share with me wonderful stories of concert going and concert experiences in his life. So it is real honor and very touching for me to be able to dedicate this performance in his memory. Beautiful and peaceful piece by Bach, and I hope that this will bring some peace and some reflections of Charles for you.
Charles liked Hye-Jin's playing so much.
Yeah. Am I okay? Am I okay? All right. Charles has been here for 26 years. And indeed, it was his second life. Well, much better than first life, I think. I would like to talk about personal stories with him. For the last 16 years, we were blessed to have each other, and
shared life's many good things together. We love classical music, history, art, books, and of course, Italy. And we traveled Europe many times together, exactly 8 times during summer and the winter break, usually for 3 weeks at a time. In the beginning, Charles was my former husband's beloved professor, and his best friend. My husband taught in the mathematics department here at ECU, but audited all his Charles' classes and bonded together for the love of Italy. I often invited Charles to come over to Korean dinner. And while they talk about Italy and other things, I would slip away to the background. So actually, Charles didn't know me very much at that time. My husband died of cancer in 2007 at the age of 50. I thought I should have left the place of the pain, for a while. So I left the States and traveled to Europe. I participated in art workshop in southern France and visited the Romanesque churches in the mountainous region of Auvergne. It's a self-imposed test. How would my life without him feel like? But unexpectedly, I found the Romanesque churches beautiful, and that has a healing power. And then also that made me intrigued how I perceived the Romanesque churches before. And I said, how come did I not know this? I had taught art history courses in many Korean colleges before. So I thought, there is something wrong with art history books. I thought. So I swore then and there that I would come back again to investigate in order to fulfill the pledge to myself. Next year, 2008, I devised the Paris study abroad program. So after completing the program and sending off my students to United States, I visited the Romanesque churches in Burgundy, where many big and famous Romanesque churches were located. Of course, I had to rent a car, just like I did before, and I cannot count how many times I got lost. Yeah. It was September 2008, after coming back from Europe, that Charles and I became close. From then on, Charles accompanied me in my journey to Romanesque churches. He financed all the churches, or all the trips, drove rugged mountainous roads, and interpreted Italian, French, and Spanish language. We usually did not reserve hotels ahead of time unless we are heading to a big city. So we drove around, and somehow we would find really charming bed and breakfast places. So it's a good memory too. And then also food, yes. 3 countries, all good. They have all good dishes, right? So before I went to each trip, I studied all the churches we will visit there. And after the trip, I looked at my photos closely to analyze Romanesque forms and spaces. Overall, we visited about 150 churches in France, Italy, Spain. There are many Romanesque churches in Germany and England, but we didn't go there because they are so massive and overbuilt that we didn't like it. And then also he liked to travel in Latin Europe. So we went to Sicily, Italy, France, and Spain twice each. And in 2016, I published a book on Romanesque architecture in Korean. That's there, over there. Yeah. Now I'm finishing up translating the book to English. And Charles edited already the whole all chapters. When the English book is published, it will be dedicated to Charles. He solely deserves the dedication. He enjoyed visiting each church as much as I did, and appreciated the beauty of the architecture and my photos. Without his loving support, I could not have come this far. He was present when I took all these pictures. Thus, I printed out some small pictures over there, so you can take one as a souvenir. So I think it's a good, good gift to you, so that you can come here. So thank you very much.
So we're turning to Charles, the Neo-Latin scholar, and very kindly, Paul Grenler is going to say a few words on behalf of James Estes, and I would invite you up, and then Thomas will come in with some words as well. Would you like us to bring the mic to you? Okay.
I'm here primarily to speak for Jim Estes. And as we looked at some of the pictures, he was a participant in the conference, I think it was in 2013 when Charles retired, and he is pictured at least a couple of times. It sort of goes by very fast, but he is there. So I'm speaking for him. He's a professor emeritus of history at the University of Toronto, and he is an accomplished Erasmus scholar. Remembering Charles Fantazzi. In my memory and my written records, if my memory and my written records are to be trusted, Charles and I first met in 1987, the year in which I joined the editorial board of the collected works of Erasmus, and he, long since a member of the board, came to Toronto to attend one of its meetings. As I recall, a feeling of amiable collegiality was quickly established between us, but we were working on different series in the edition and did not have contact with one another all that often. Close collaboration between us came only a dozen or so years later, when we found ourselves jointly responsible for the first of the 5 volumes of Erasmus's correspondence that we would end up doing together. It was then that we formed the friendship that would last for the rest of Charles's life. There were many things about Charles that made working with him a happy experience. There was, of course, his profound learning, lightly born, as well as the seemingly effortless ease with which he maintained the elegance and clarity of what had been established as Erasmus's English style. To these qualities were added the speed and accuracy of his work, as well as his patience and good humor in the shared search for solutions to difficult problems of translation and annotation. As if that were not enough, Charles also prepared, indeed, if that was not enough, Charles was also prepared indeed eager to come to the rescue when other contributors to the Erasmus Project were incapacitated by illness or death. But for his selfless intervention, for example, 2 volumes of the correspondence for which I was originally co-responsible with someone else might still be seeking a replacement for a translator who was no longer able to carry on. It is, above all, for his remarkable kindness, generosity, and greatness of spirit that I shall forever remain grateful to Charles. Requiescat in pace. James M. Estes, Professor Emeritus of History, University of Toronto, Chair Emeritus, Editorial Board, Collected Works of Erasmus. I will add that on the table back there are the 5 volumes that Charles and Jim Estes together did. Charles did the translation, Jim did the annotations, plus 6 other volumes in which, as Jim Estes says, Charles volunteered or helped out when someone else couldn't do it. So he plays a role in 11 volumes of the collected works of Erasmus. Now, I would like to add my own brief tribute to Charles. Like Jim Estes, I met him through the collected works of Erasmus. And I'm only going to mention a couple of things. The first was his generosity. I was doing an article on Vives, and I ran into a difficulty. So naturally, I emailed Charles, and he solved my problem for me very easily. And I'm very grateful to him. No one has said very much here today about his editions, translations, and critical editions of the works of Vives. And with your permission, I'll say a couple words about them. Vives is probably not nearly as well known as Erasmus, but he was the second most important, in my view, of the northern humanists after Erasmus. And he did an incredible number of works, some of them trailblazing. And Charles edited, again, the Latin, critical Latin edition with the translation, quite a few of them. Again, they're back there on the table. I'll just mention a couple of them. For example, the Treatise on the Education of Women, which was a trailblazing treatise, very important for the history of the education of women. Another treatise is another trailblazing work. It's on poor relief. And it was a very far-sighted work, which I think would be appreciated today. Maybe not by the Republican Party, but that's another story. My point is simply that Charles wasn't just an Erasmus scholar. He also was a very distinguished scholar of Vives, who was very important. And we haven't even mentioned Poliziano, a very important Italian poet. I could go on, but maybe that's enough of that. The other thing I want to mention is his love of singing and choral music. As you know, he was a very fine tenor, which meant that he was worth his weight in gold to choruses and to directors of choruses. I've also sung in choruses, and I still do. I enjoyed talking about, by the way, I'm not a tenor, and I'm not nearly as good as Charles was. But I enjoyed talking about choral music with Charles. And I'd like to think that he is still singing maybe a Bach cantata in a great chorus far above us. May he rest in peace. Oh, one other thing I want to mention, just that might interest you. Luke Dietz is going to do an obituary in the Catholic Historical Review. I hope it will appear in the next issue.
Yeah, I'm Tom Heron. I didn't properly introduce myself. I'm in the English department, and my academic connection to Charles is also profound in the sense that he helped introduce me to Neo-Latin literature, for example, his translation of Poliziano, also his translation of Marullus, both of which he completed and wrote while at ECU. He retired once and then had an entirely new career among us, and it was great. He also gave me a copy of various sort of Italian reviews and articles and things in translation. I was very grateful to him for widening my perspective. Getting into the literature, another anecdote that I loved that he told was when he was working on his dissertation with Poggioli, or Clausen was also, and I'm not sure which one, but he was told or decided he would work on Sannazzaro's poem on the Virgin Birth. Sannazzaro's from Naples, so he was going to go on an academic research trip to Naples. And so Poggioli brought him into his office, told him what to do, where he should go, what archives, etc., and then gave him $50. And Charles is looking at this and say, "What is this for?" And Poggioli said, "Well, you'll have to bribe the archivist to see the work," and that's true. But I also come to literature from the Anglo-Saxon side, the English side, and so for me, the weight of books that are on that table is, if I can make the analogy, like the fully loaded ship of Scyld Scefing at the beginning of Beowulf, which is a translation by Seamus Heaney that Charles also has on his bookshelf. And who knows who will salvage that load, as Heaney writes. And I hope some of you will take the two cultures with you. And to shift to the end of that epic, for me, losing Charles is like losing a chieftain. There's a sense of panic in the tribe. How can we replace him? How can academia replace him? Our walls have been breached by death. But the beauty of print, of course, is that his works will live on forever, even if fewer and fewer people and students have the opportunity to study them seriously. One great regret of my life is that we as a collective failed to build on the energy and enthusiasm of the Neo-Latin Conference in his honor, which we dubbed Fantazzi Fest, at a crucial time here when we were also optimistic at ECU. To have done so would have been to make a more lasting tribute or monument in his honor. For example, a summer school in Neo-Latin would have been wonderful here on campus. And I'm reminded of Coroliter, the term in his honor that you find phrased over there, which means, among its various meanings, it means to finish or to see a project through, and we haven't done that. So shame on us. Nonetheless, Charles, his presence among us certainly inspired all of us to work harder and to do more. The amount that he did is amazing. And it also allowed him to work on and finish at ECU, to be among us, and it makes us all very grateful. And a couple of the works that he wrote, that he translated so eloquently as well, I thought I would read passages from them so you can hear him in his own words. The first is the Poliziano, the Silvae, and I found a passage which is really, this is a fellow Neo-Latin Italian who's writing in the pagan vein of the life and vitality of spring that comes. This is in the Silvae called The Countryman. This is Charles's translation. And why should I relate his pleasures in the profound relaxation that follows upon his labors? That is, the labors of winter. As soon as the breezes of flower-bearing Favonius have thawed the high slopes, previously covered with snow, the wandering stars smile sweetly in the serene sky. The moon gently drives its slow-moving bullocks through the clear, bright sky. The disk of her celestial brother shines brighter also, and the spouse of Tithonus, borne by the winged Pegasus, wrings out her locks, drenched with nectar, and bathes the earth with fecund dew. Another work is a translation of Michael Maroulis, and this also, I found this in Charles's library with a review inside of it. It's a glowing review in Renaissance Quarterly, where he also published many reviews. He was a wide reader and a real citizen. These are things you don't get really much credit for as an academic, which is reviewing other books. He did hundreds. And Maroulis is also a particularly difficult author. And here is an epistle, as it were, in verse to Francesco Nino of Siena, who I'm sure is a forerunner and ancestor of the Ninos of Greenville. And Maroulis was himself an exile from Constantinople when it was taken by the Turks. So one of the Greeks, or the descendants of the Greeks who had come westward to enrich the Renaissance. Why do you wonder that I preserve one unchanging attitude in times that are not unchanged, and that my courage does not falter in the face of many adversities? It is a shameful thing, Francesco, to be affected by the caprices of fortune, and to subject one's soul to the mercy of the mistress of the wheel of fortune, and in the midst of the evils of exile to lose one's purpose in life, and allow blessings that are certain to perish because of life's uncertainties. I am neither the first nor the only one to suffer such things. Often such disasters befall great men. And though I may have little good fortune, at least I can be declared to be without blame. Shameful guilt is more dishonorable than personal loss. So pious Aeneas, so Teucer, once had to flee their native land, and yet each of them lived in the midst of exile, and was not ashamed to loosen his tongue with deep draughts of wine, and entwine his perfumed hair with garlands. How often both of them consoled their dejected friends with words like these: while it is lawful and permissible, drive away obsessive cares. O hearts known to me through your unfailing fidelity, do not be disturbed by tribulations on sea and land, or be touched by a nostalgic solicitude for your native land. Any place whatever is a native land for men of valor, and it is not to your credit to waste precious time through oppressive idleness. At this point, how much time is left to us? We regret having suffered perilous trials if matters of little consequence beset us. These things will also have an end, but do not think the end will last forever. The goddess who flies throughout the world is so inconstant. His speech was followed by the applause of the crowded assembly, and he drank profusely from a huge gold goblet. And they celebrated a joyful banquet with abundance of wine, and dissolved their worries and cares in drink. So again, I'm looking ahead to the end. So I had one more thing I wanted to read out if I could. It's my own scattered poem. It was inspired by Charles, which I gave him long ago. I don't know if he read it, but I do know, because I found it in a study, that he used it as sort of scratch paper. It says, confer 1-9 check. So clearly he was after something and writing on it. So I found the poem, which I'd written for him back in 2016, and I kind of included as an afterthought, as there's one more thing that I want to put on his ship as it sails away. It's called Charles in Florence, 1960. And I wrote it after hearing about his wonderful stories, one of his wonderful stories about being a Fulbright scholar in Florence in 1960, which must have been a golden age for both him and for Florence. I end the poem with an adage by Erasmus that Charles told me once: live as if you'll die tomorrow, study as if you'll live forever. So Charles in Florence, 1960. A light tap on the baptistry doors suffices for the fully bright, Aravist scholar come to chase his native voice. The doors are portals of knowing, bronze pages that Charles pushes in towards the light. Festina lente. Face forward, freshly arrived, he makes a tour of each library and museum before he writes a word. Day done, he'll wander towards Boboli, like a youth on a fresco wall, he and Poliziano conversing in the sun. He takes aim at Marullus and at the Medicis, like David took the height of the sun, dispersing the giant shadow until the armies reassemble. The scholar's task is not to hold back the tide of ignorance, but to float galleys on a never-ending sea. Home again, a flood washes over his dreams. Memories stand for journeys, and what's done is done. Write on, scholar, dip your pen in the blood of the dead, sing with the ghosts, and live on with the blessed. Live as if you'll die tomorrow, and study as if your time will never end. Thank you.
We now turn it over to those who would like to speak about Charles's well-beloved colleague, friend, family member, teacher. And to start us off, Annalyn Miller, our colleague who's now at Tennessee, University of Tennessee, will speak.
First, thank you very much for inviting me to celebrate Charles' life. I first met Charles here when I came to teach. Contrary to my colleagues who talk here, I'm not a Renaissance scholar. I'm a medievalist. I work in medieval studies. And to me, Charles was my colleague in Italian. And like him, I was trained as a comparatist in French and Italian. So he was my colleague in medieval Italian and medieval Latin also. So the first year I was here, I was working on a piece that involved discussing a text by Brunetto Latini, who is well known as Dante's master, and a little text called Tesoretto. And I was struggling with the translation, so of course, what a incredible chance to have next door Carlo. I often call him Carlo, as like some of us, Carlo Fantazzi. So I have to pick his brain. So I scrabbled, translated in English, and ran that piece by him. And of course, he had a lot to say. The analysis we discussed, but the translation, of course, there was a lot of red. And so my English was not too good, so anyway, I in the end, it turned out to be, I think, a good essay. Of course, he wanted no credit for it, but I still did. I thank him at the very beginning of this essay, because I think I would not have been able to write it without his help. Like you said, and then not too long ago, we've been in touch over the years, even though I moved on in the meantime. I'm now at Tennessee. Not too long ago, I shared a chapter by him also that talked about different 12th century texts, including one by Fougère of Chartres. I don't know if you know, is a 12th century writer, the account of the First Crusade in Latin. And that was not I didn't share because of that particular passage, because of other things. And then he returned to me some comment, the analysis of the chapter, ideas, and again, the translation by Fougère in English, a lot of red. But you know what? I didn't write it. It was actually an authority. I used someone else's translation. And I don't think he realized. So I looked at it again, and gosh, he was right. Charles was right. His medieval Latin was so spot on and so good. And, so I mean, he was so talented. So we talk about, the training to do what he's done. I mean, there's certainly an incredible, a solid education, training, but there's also gift, talent, a talent for languages. And we read this translation. Those are amazing. Those are beautiful. And also, how many languages could he read? I mean, I don't even know to speak, but also to be able to read. So there's one thing. Another thing, of course, is his incredible generosity with his knowledge. And he wanted no credit, and I think he often helped more people than he took credit for. And when you look at here, what we have here on this table, you see not only the incredible work, but the collaboration. He understood that to advance knowledge in the humanities, we need to collaborate. We need to share. We need to exchange ideas. We do it at conferences. Often, you know, we think we need to write that monograph, but really, the edition of works, translation, which are so important in our field, and this is a service that lasts forever to our profession. And here, those texts, this is an incredible legacy. We use them. I use the Vives, by the way. I teach medieval studies, but I teach occasionally in the early modern, and especially on women. And we use Charles' translation on women education by Vives. So that's actually very, very useful. And so those are the sort of things that I feel are so invaluable. I've been in conversation with Carlo over the years and until not too long ago. And I also want to say that also in conversation, even outside of the academia, he understood the importance of the words that you use in conversation, the choice of words. He was always very careful. He was always very thoughtful about how to talk about certain things or not talk about certain things. You know, we've had a lot of conversation also sometimes without words. I think when you sometimes understand each other without having to vocalize. And I've had the privilege to have some of those with Charles sometimes. And we've had also sometimes deep conversation, probably because we connected over a very strict Catholic education that I also had in my childhood in France. And so we had conversation about, which is strange now that I think about it. The last time, not too long ago, it was here, a few months ago, well, almost a year now, actually, about life, about choices, difficult choices that we make, and our struggle also with our Catholic faith sometimes. So anyway, I leave it there. That's a conversation for me to keep. But I just want to say I'm going to miss you very, very much. And so I'm just going to say, as we used to do in our email, I often say, grazie Carlo, tanti auguri.
Is there anyone else who wants to share a memory? Please comment.
Hi, folks. I'm Carmine Scavo, Professor Emeritus in Political Science. And to establish my bona fides, my mother's family is Sicilian, and my father's family is from Calabria. But I don't say that for any other reason except that when I first met Carlo, and like Annalyn, we always call him Carlo, back in the late 90s when he first arrived here in Greenville, when he heard my name, he thought, of course I understood Italian. And he would speak Italian to me, and I would say, si, and he would speak more Italian to me. I remember somewhere around 2000 or 2001 or so, I was in the old Harris Teeter store on 14th Street, and I heard these two guys speaking Italian to each other. And I thought, oh my goodness, somebody speaks Italian in Greenville. So I went up to them and I said, in my like 10 words of Italian, scusi signore, parli inglese? And the guy said, oh, of course I speak English. And I said, well, what are you doing here in Greenville? And he said, well, I'm a professor at the University of Palermo, and I'm here in Greenville for a conference on tropical medicine at the medical school. And it goes on for a week or so. And I said, oh, you need to contact Carlo Fantazzi in the Department of Foreign Languages. His family is Sicilian, and I'm sure he would love to speak with you. Well, that was it. A day or so later, Carlo called me and said, come to dinner. This guy from Sicily is coming for dinner. Please come to in his old apartment off of Cotanch. So I went for dinner, and here is this Sicilian medical doctor making shrimp and pasta, and it was just the most remarkable meal. And Carlo and this guy are talking to each other, not in Italian, but in Sicilian. Afterwards, after this wonderful evening, and there was a professor from the medical school, so I think there were maybe 4 or 5 of us for dinner. After a couple of days later, I spoke with Carlo, and he said, you know, really was difficult, because I haven't spoken Sicilian since I was really young, and I had to reach back and relearn some of these things, because it's, you know, Sicilian is a very different language from Italian. And since then, several times he mentioned to me that when he and Nanyang went to Sicily, he had to reach back to his Sicilian roots in order to understand the language. When my daughter, Marissa, started at UNC, she took Italian as her foreign language. And Nanyang and Carlo used to come for Thanksgiving dinner, where I tried to recreate what my mother would do, which was we would have a huge Southern Italian feast, and then we would have a traditional Thanksgiving dinner. So this was like a 5-hour feast that we would have. Carlo decided, although Marissa was in Italian 101, that she was fluent in Italian. And so he would just say, you know, to her in Italian, and she, like me, would say, si, 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 si. And he thought, of course, this meant she understood what he was saying, and he would just go on and say more to her. And then Young is saying, yes, she remembers this. Anyway, if I had wine, I would offer a toast, but I have an empty glass. So I'm sure someone else will come up with a full glass and offer a toast. You know, the one last thing, and this is, I don't even know the word. Maudlin is the only word I can think of, but I'm not sure that that's the correct word. I knew Carlo for 25 years, and he always looked and acted exactly the same over that time. He was somebody who I thought realistically would live forever. Every time I saw him, always in Lidl or in Harris Teeter, he'd be shopping for something, and I would say, oh, professore, and he would lapse into Italian and start speaking Italian to me as if I understood what he was saying, and we would just, you know, we would hug but again, he just feels like somebody who would live forever. And knowing he had passed was just such a shock. Although, you know, eventually, folks, we're all going to go, right? There's no other way out of this earth than that. So we're all going to go. But to find out, you know, he was in his 90s, which was amazing to me because I remember him as much younger than that. And again, I just thought that he would live forever. Anyway, that's my reminiscence.
Well, here goes nothing. Everyone, thank you for inviting me to this celebration of my great uncle and my godfather, Charles Emmanuel Fantazzi. I wrote some notes because I was afraid the emotion may prevent me from giving you some great insights into
being his niece and goddaughter, great niece actually. My mother was Rosemary, and that was his niece. And I'm not sure if I should read first or just start to talk from my heart. Let me read first. Okay. Good afternoon, distinguished guests and professors and students of Charles Fantazzi. My name is Patricia White. I'm married to Dennis White. Raise your hand. Okay. Dennis has a very interesting story. Our last name is White, but his grandfather came from Italy at a very tender age and didn't speak a word of English. He was being sponsored by a relative in New York, and he couldn't answer the question when, the people in Ellis Island are, deciding whether or not you're going to stay or go. And my great-grandfather was given the name White. Maybe he had on a white shirt. I have no idea, but our family name is Bonacora. And can anyone translate that in this audience? Good heart. And my husband does truly have a good heart in his family. And when I told my Uncle Charlie I was marrying Italian, wow, that really went over good. Then when he met him, they were fast friends. So now my stupid iPad, I'm sorry, I have to sign in again. Okay. I'm looking at these pictures here, and I'm realizing this day was going to come, but it was one of those things, as prepared as you think you are for someone to die in your family, it doesn't make it any easier when it happens. As the gentleman before me very eloquently said, when death comes, I don't have words for what I'm trying to express. I all think you probably understand how I'm feeling. I am literally the last surviving member of this strong, hardworking, poor people who raised my Uncle Charlie, and his star shone more brightly than anyone else's. And as Professor Reed gave you he gave the story of the early years of my uncle, I might be able to add a little bit more. So, I've studied classical piano since I was 8 years old, with a little coaxing from my mother, Charles's niece, and her name was Rosemary. And among my most cherished memories of him were when I had the joy of accompanying him on the piano while he sang in that beautiful tenor voice he had. And he was a constant in my life and an inspiration to me to continue my career as a music teacher, which I have succeeded in doing, and I've just retired, and also my studies in the Italian language, which the gentleman before me can truly appreciate. I went to college as a non-traditional student. That just means old.
My father was very blue collar. He was not a liberal. He actually sat me down after I graduated from high school, and I was looking to go on to higher learning. And he sat me down at the table and he said, "What are you thinking of being?" And I was like, "Well, what are you talking about?" And he said, "I'm not going to pay tuition for you to go just like smoke pot and, you know, be singing songs against the Vietnam War." I was born in 1956, so I was, you know, a kid during the war and, you know, all of that stuff. And I said, "I don't know, Dad, what I want to be. I just know I want to be educated." And he said, "That's not good enough. If you can't tell me what you're going to go to school for, you're not going to school. You're going to get your tail out there. You're going to get a job. You're going to find out what it's like in the real world and work. Then if you decide to go to school, we'll talk." And this is what happened. I did go to work, and I continued to work. And I had a successful career in banking. I was stricken with a very serious autoimmune disease when I was 19 years old, ulcerative colitis. I'm not afraid to share that with you. I never thought I'd fall in love and get married, but I found a man who loves me for what I am. I just got off track again. Okay, I'm so sorry. Favorite memory. Charles gifted Dennis and I at our wedding in 1985 by singing with the organist in the Sacred Heart Church in Yonkers, New York. And don't ask me what he sang, because I was the bride and I was too nervous. The whole thing was a blur. Well, he did Ave Maria when we went to present the bouquet to the statue of the Blessed Virgin. But I'm pretty sure he did Schumann's, he did the Schumann version of, help me out, I can't think right now. What am I talking about? Our wedding, yeah. But he did something by Schumann. The wedding march, right? Yeah. And then the antiphon as you're leaving, da 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 da, here's Mr. and Mrs. White. He sang again, and everybody at that church was dumbfounded. They thought this was a record that we played. And they're all looking up in the back where the organist is, and they see this guy singing. So after, you know, the nuptials, people were coming up to me and they said, who was that voice? I mean, this was when his voice was at its peak. And I said, oh, that was my uncle. You know, no big deal. And so you can imagine the impression that made on everybody that was at our wedding. Another great memory is when my husband and I were fortunate enough to attend the symposium for 3 days in 2011, I believe it was, in the month of May? February, because, yeah, the same year I had open heart surgery. Yeah, that's how I remember it was in 2011. So we attended the symposium here at ECU, and while Dennis and I were trying to decide on
what's the perfect gift to give to our uncle, Uncle Charlie? We decided on an engraved, beautiful Mont Blanc pen. You know, I'm all excited, you know, he's opening the box. He looks at it. I said, look at it closely, it's engraved. And he said, oh my, I better not lose this one. So we were all cracking up, and Luke was at the table, and I think Dr. Reed was at the table, but it was funny, but it was typical Uncle Charlie. I'm going to include now. I think the most important memories are the so many conversations that I've had with him, usually on the telephone because we live such a far distance away. Dennis and I live in Flemington, New Jersey, in the greater Princeton area. And we would write, that's what I've got in my hand. This is only the tip of the iceberg. My uncle never went anywhere without sending my mother and me a postcard. I've kept these. They're old. I'm going to read you just a line that he wrote to my mother. He was up in Toronto. So it's dated 2001. Dear Rosemary, he always called her Rosemary with the emphasis on the Mary, where we called her Rosemary. Okay, so, dear Rosemary, thank you for the 4 quarts of oil and the great turkey sandwich. It came in handy after 300 miles or so on the turnpike, and this is so typical. My uncle had a gift. He could sit with kings and he could sit with paupers and treat them equally. How many people do you know that you can say that about? He was so unassuming. He was so warm. He lit up my life. So, Nan Young, I want to thank you for having me here. I've gotten to know you very, very well from all of my trips down to Ocracoke Island, where we vacationed since 30 years or so, and I feel like she's an aunt to me. Emo. Okay. Kamsahamnida. That's all I can say in Korean, because I went to Seoul and I had to say thank you and please. My uncle has left us a legacy. It includes not only his devotion to scholarship, but his love for his family, friends, and colleagues. I am so grateful to have had him in my life, and he will be deeply missed and always remembered. My Uncle Charles and I always exchanged letters in Italian because I was studying Italian in the university. So I'd have to get out my little Italian-American dictionary to figure out what the heck he was saying to me. And they're here, and I'm telling you, this is so, I am gifting these to Nan Young because they lend insight into his heart. So I want to say, I would always close my letters to my uncle with the same salutation. Addio, mio caro zio. Ci vediamo presto. Translation is, go with God, my dear uncle, And until we see each other again, Patrizia, thank you. Thank you very much.
I think it might be time for L'Occitana. Do you think? I think Carmen had a great idea. Why don't you come and grab a glass and some food and a toast and share stories, more stories. This is